At exactly 9 a.m. in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a caller called 911 to report an emergency. When the 911 operator answered the call, he asked the caller if she needed police, fire, or medical. The caller said he needs police and probably medical. The operator asked the caller for his address. The caller said it's behind a field 129th of McDonald's and Admiral. The operator asked the caller what was going on. The caller said a kid lying in the middle of a dirt road. He said the victim is a teenager and he is lying face down. The 911 operator asked the caller if the teenager is moving or breathing. The caller said he is not moving and breathing. He said he thinks the teenager is dead. Detective Chase Calhoun, Detective Jason, and other team members headed to Tulsa. Detective Chase told his team members in the car that they received a call from an unknown person. He said the caller stated that they found a body next to a dirt road in the woods. Detective Jason said it's Detective Chase's first case, and he has to prove to them why they chose and initiated him. When the team arrived at the dirt road, they found the teenager lying face down just as the caller said. Detective Chase said the teenager should be 15 or 16. He asked the first respondents if they have gotten an ID for the teenager. They said they haven't. The detectives noticed bloodstains on the leg and back of the teenager's head. They also noticed that the teenager's pocket was turned on. Detective Jason said the pocket been turned on maybe due to the grabbing of the teenager's cell phone by his killer. Detective Chase asked the first respondents how long has the teenager been dropped there. Detective Jason said he thinks it's not more than a day. While detectives waited for the medical examiner, Detective Chase Calhoun spoke to the 911 caller. Detective Chase asked the 911 caller if he lives there. The 911 caller said he lives in his van. Detective asked the 911 caller if he was just cruising through the dirt road when he found the teenager. The caller replied in the affirmative. He said he was just on his way out when he saw the body lying there. Detective Chase asked the caller that when was the last time he drove through there. The caller said yesterday. Detective Calhoun asked him what time. He said 11:30 p.m. Detective Chase asked the caller if he saw the body when he drove through there the last time. He said he didn't see the body. 2 hours in, the ME discovered that the teenager was shot once in his chest. They also saw foam which the ME said could be from the inside of the car of the suspects. They noticed some marks on the body of the teenager. The ME said it looked like the boy was drugged and swabbed on his wrists and his ankles. The ME said DNA swab will be tested to look for trace evidence of a suspect. They will also take his prints back to the lab. Detective Jason said they should take photos of the victim's shoes and necklace. He said the photos will stand out for somebody. Detective Jason said the case is challenging, especially as it is the first case for Detective Chase. Detective Jason said once they find out who the teenager is, it will be 300 more pieces to the puzzle. He said after that, the family will be on board, and they will start finding out and getting leads. Detective Jason said the case will cause outrage because the boy is too young. Back at Homicide, Detective Chase Calhoun got an update from the crime lab. The crime lab was not able to identify the teenager by his fingerprints. Detective Jason said they should release the photos of the victim's shoes and necklace to the media. He said he hoped they will be able to get a lead if they do that. Detective Chase was also monitoring the city of Tulsa's 911 calls to see if anybody will call in about a missing person. The photos released by the team lead to a broadcast. An hour after the broadcast, a woman called in. She said her fiance's little brother, 16 years old Darrin Wilson, has been missing since last night. Sergeant Walker, who was the detective that answered the woman's call, asked her if the victim had a Facebook page. The woman said the victim had a Facebook page in his name. When detectives searched for the victim on Facebook, they found a picture that was consistent with his eyebrows, hair, height, And wait, Detective Jason said the picture they pulled out of Facebook has to be the victim. After the search, Sergeant Walker reached out back to Darrin Wilson's family. Sergeant Walker asked the victim's family if there is anyone that can identify the victim from a picture. The family members said Darrin's loved ones are gathered at his mother's house. Sergeant Walker said they will be on their way to the victim's mother's house. After a few minutes, the team led by Detective Calhoun arrives at the house of the victim's mother. Detective Calhoun met Darrin's sister-in-law Lajani Wilson and showed her the photo of the victim. Immediately she saw the picture, she started crying. She told Detective Chase that the person in the photo is Darrin Wilson. Detective Chase consoled her and other family members. He said he knew what they have been going through since the victim was declared missing. The 16-year-old Darrin Wilson is known to friends and family as Dada, attended East Central High School, where he played football and competed in track and field. He had hopes of going to college and playing Division I football. Darrin left behind his parents and 3 siblings. Detective Chase asked Darrin's sister-in-law if Darrin's mom is there. She showed Detective Chase Darrin's mother. Detective Chase told Darrin's mother that her son was shot. He said her son was found in a field. Darrin's mother asked Detective Chase if he think Darrin was dropped off in the field. Detective Chase said that is what he knows. Detective Jason approached Darrin's mom where she was standing and crying. He told her that they need the family. He said they need people who might have been hanging out with Darrin last night. Darrin's mother said he told her he was going to play basketball. Detective Jason asked her the time Darrin left home to play basketball. She said it was around 5 the previous day. She said Darrin told her that he was going to spend the night with his friend. And she said okay. She said Darrin didn't mention the name of his friend. She said Darrin only uses his phone to send Facebook messages through Wi-Fi. Darrin's mother told the detectives that they have to find the people that killed her son. Detective Jason told her if there is any way to find those people, they will do it. Then, a family friend pulled detectives aside. Detective Chase asked the family friend if he knows whether Chase has been involved with bad people. He said he doesn't know. Detective Chase asked him if he knows what Chase has been up to lately. He said he just know that Darrin does a lot of trading with shoes. He said Darrin has been selling sneakers to make money. He said he dropped Darrin a month ago. He said Darrin went out of the car, traded shoes, and he got back in. He said he doesn't know whether Darrin was involved in anything bad. Detective Jason told his team members that it is obvious that there are a lot of people that love Darrin. He said when you meet someone's loved one who just lost their child, it's a tragedy. He said it can instill extra motivation to want to solve it. The team entered their car and headed to homicide headquarters. While they were driving, Detective Chase said the family wasn't able to get a whole lot of information. He said he wondered how Darrin was getting the shoes they said he was selling. When they got back to homicide, Detective Chase told the team members that he hopes they will be able to get some of the victims' information about some possible motives as to why somebody would want to kill him the next day. He told the team that at the end of the first day, they don't have evidence and video surveillance or witnesses. He said he believes that the case is not a sprint but a marathon. He said eventually they will get to the finish line. The next morning, Detective Calhoun got a warrant for Darrin's Facebook messages hoping to identify who Darrin met with the night he went missing. 26 hours in, the team got an update from Darrin's autopsy. A small caliber bullet was recovered from Darrin's chest. Based on the bullet trajectory, the ME believes that the shooter was standing over the victim. Detectives believe that the pieces of foam that were found on Darrin's shirt were from the car he was shot in. The MEs did not find anything in the head for injuries. Then, the team got a recorded tip from the Crime Stoppers hotline. The voice in the recording said he has information on Darrin. He said he thinks Darrin was set up. He said just message me. After the team listened to the recording, Detective Calhoun sent a text to the tipster, and he immediately hears back. The tipster sent a message to Detective Chasing informing him that he can talk. The tipster said he was going to meet Detective Calhoun at the strip mall. Detective Calhoun and Detective Jason immediately entered their car and headed to the strip mall to meet the tipster. When they arrived at the strip mall, they met the tipster who was already waiting for them. Detective Chase introduced himself and introduced Detective Jason too. He told the tipster that they appreciate him for calling them to give them information. The tipster said Darrin was a good kid. He said he didn't like the way Darrin died. Detective Chase asked the tipster how well he knew Darrin. The tipster said he and Darrin played football together. Detective Jason asked the tipster about the stuff that Darrin got into. The tipster said he think Darrin was just selling shoes. Detective Chase asked the tipster if Darrin was stealing or taking stuff that does not belong to him. The tipster said he thinks Darrin was stealing the shoes he was selling because he was selling shoes that were worth $200 at the rate of $100. The tipster said the night before Darrin went missing, he met with Darrin to buy sneakers. He said after he left Darrin, he went to meet a mutual friend. He said he told his friend that he got the shoes that were with him for $100. He said his friend asked him whether he got the shoes from Darrin because Darrin just sent him a picture of that shoe for $100. He said Darrin had a plan for the $100. He said Darrin wanted to buy a small gun the next day. Detective Chase asked the tipster if Darrin was going to buy the gun from his mutual friend. The tipster replied in the affirmative. He said the next day he found out that Darrin was dead. Detective Chase asked the tipster if he knew whether Darrin met with his friend. The tipster said he doesn't know. The tipster said once he saw the description of how Darrin died, he knew it was sketchy. He said he knew his friend did something with Darrin. He said after he heard of Darrin's death, he tried contacting his friend, but it was his mom that picked up. He said the mom told him that his friend is not there. The tipster said he thinks Darrin was set up when he was trying to buy a gun. Detective Chase appreciated the tipster and told him to give him a call if he has any information. When they returned to homicide, Detective Chase told the team that they will run on the guy that was trying to sell the gun to the victim the next day. He said they are going to solve the case. He said it is his first homicide case, so it has to happen. In the first 48 hours, Detective Chase Calhoun identified a body that was found dumped in a field as 16 years old Darrin Wilson, and learned from a tipster that on the night Darrin went missing, he was trying to buy a gun. Now, Detective Chase Calhoun needs to track down the young man who was going to sell the gun to Darrin. 3 days in, Detective Calhoun looks up the tipster's friend and found a phone number for his mother. Detective Calhoun reached out to the mother of the tipster's friend. He told her his name and his place of work. He told her that he called about her son because he wants to talk to him. She said she hasn't seen her son since the night that Darrin went missing. She said she didn't know he was gone until the next morning because he had put something in his bed to make it seem like he was there. Detective Chase asked of his cell phone. The mother said they had just taken his cell phone. She said she hasn't had any communication with him. Detective Calhoun told the mother that he is going to need her help. The mother agreed to call Detective Calhoun if she finds her son. A few hours later, the mother called Detective Calhoun that she found her son, and she brought him back home. Detective Calhoun told the mother that he is heading her way immediately. When detectives arrived at the house, the mother agreed that she will allow her son to talk at homicide. The detectives left the house with the boy and headed back to homicide. When they got to homicide, the boy was taken into an interrogation room for questioning. Detective Jason and Detective Chase were the detectives that entered the room to interrogate him. When they entered, Detective Chase introduced himself and introduced Detective Jason. He asked the boy if he knows why he was there talking to them. He said it's because Darrin is dead. Detective Chase asked the boy that when was the last time he hung out with Darrin. He said he hung out with Darrin a couple of weeks ago before school ended. He said the last time he saw Darrin was about a month ago. but they talked on Tuesday and Wednesday. Detective Jason asked the boy what he and Darrin talked about. He said he needs him to be 100% honest with him. The boy said Darrin was trying to buy a gun, and he knew some people that were selling guns. He said Darrin called him and told him that he has $100 and he needed a pistol. He said around 8 p.m. on Wednesday, he talked with Darrin. He said he told Darrin that he doesn't know if he can get the pistol, and he pushed the away from the conversation about the gun. He said that was the last time he spoke to Darrin. Detective Jason asked him what happened next. The boy said he heard that Darrin died around 2 p.m. on Thursday. Detective Chase told the boy that it looks a little bit funny that he and Darrin were talking about buying a gun, and then Darrin disappeared, and he also disappeared. Detective Jason asked the boy if he understands how it looks like, and he replied in the affirmative. Detective Jason said what it looks like. The boy said it looks bad. Detective Chase told the boy that they need to figure out what happened that night. The boy said what happened that night was that he never talked to Chase again. Detective Chase asked the boy where he went to when he left his mom's house that night. He said he went over to sleep at a friend's house. Detective Chase asked for the phone number of the friend, and he gave him. Immediately, detectives collected the phone number. They stepped out of the interrogation room. Detective Calhoun called the friend to check the story of the boy. Detective Calhoun asked the friend if the boy was there overnight. The friend said that the boy was there overnight. Detective Chase and Detective Jason returned to the interrogation room after fact-checking his claim that he was at his friend's house throughout the night. Detective Chase asked him if he was familiar with DNA. He said he is familiar with it. Detective Chase said what he can do now is that he will take a buccal swab from the boy. He asked the boy if he is cool with it. He said he is cool with it. Detective Chase told the boy to open his mouth. When the boy opened his mouth, he collected the swab he needed for the DNA test. After Detective Chase took the swab, he asked the boy why Darrin needed a pistol. He said he doesn't know. Detective Chase asked him if Darrin had a beef with someone. He said Darrin doesn't have because Darrin was just one of the laid-back people. He said Darrin was an outgoing type, so he had a lot of friends. He said Darrin just wanted money. Detective Chase asked the boy where Darrin was getting money for all the shoes he was selling. He said he doesn't know. Detective Chase asked if he knows whether Darrin was hitting licks on people. He said he thinks Darrin usually hit a house that has no occupant. Detective Chase asked if it was like breaking into a house, and the boy said yes. As day 3 continues, one of Darrin's family members called detectives with a potential lead. He said words on the street were that Darrin reached out to a second man looking to buy a gun. He said Darrin met with the guy the night before he died. Corporal Nathan Schillings followed up on the lead. He got to know that the suspect is wanted in a shooting. He got to know that police had stopped a suspect couple of months ago after his warrant came out, but he ran from the police, and he has been on the run since then. Detective Calhoun called the warrant squad to try and bring the man in on his unrelated warrant. 12 more days went by with no sign of the second man that Darrin tried to buy a gun from. Detective Calhoun was in his office when he got a call from the crime lab. The crime lab told Detective Calhoun that DNA from an unknown male was found on Darrin's ankle, but it doesn't match the DNA of the first young man that Darrin tried to buy a gun from. 15 days into the investigation and desperate for leads, an inmate from a neighboring city jail claiming to have information about the murder reached out to Detective Calhoun. The inmate claimed that the second man that Darrin wanted to buy a gun from asked his father to hide a pistol for him. The inmate claimed that the potential suspect left the gun at a motel where his father stays. She said the gun could be related to the murder. Detective Calhoun hopes that they can put pressure on the father to tell them where his son is. 6 hours later, with a search warrant in hand, the team stakes out the father's motel room. Warrant's detectives spotted the father approaching his room. Detective Calhoun radioed his team that he wants a couple of guys to go ahead and get up on the door of the suspect's father so that he doesn't get back out of the room. He said he will be right behind them. As soon as the suspect's father entered the room, Detectives approached the door and told him to open his door. The team handcuffed the suspect's father and searched his room. Detectives found drugs, but they didn't find a possible murder weapon. The team arrested the father for the drugs they found in his room. Detective told the father that they will let him go if he can tell them where his son is. Detective Jason said he is hopeful that the father will shed more light on where his son is. When Detective Calhoun interrogated the father, he agrees to help detectives track his son. The dad told detectives that he was going to check back some things and get back to them. Detective Chase said he hopes the dad comes up with something concrete. 3 days after detectives spoke with the father, he gave them a location for his son. The detective met his son at the location, and they brought him in on his outstanding warrants. Detective Calhoun entered the investigation room where the boy was being held, and he introduced himself to Bai. Detective Calhoun noticed that the boy was crying, and he asked him why he was crying. Detective Chase told the boy that the reason why he wants to talk to him is about Darrin. Detective Chase asked the boy if he was with Darrin the night he died. He said he wasn't with him because he hasn't seen him for over a month. He said Darrin was like a blood brother to him. He said he is the last person that will try to hurt him. Detective Chase asked the boy if there is any reason why his DNA will be on Darrin's body. He said no. Detective Chase asked him if he will be willing to give him a swab. He said he is ready to give Detective Chase everything he needs right now. Detective Chase asked him if he knew the person that killed Darrin. He said he doesn't know. He said all H was ready to tell Detective Chase all he knew about Darrin. He said he learned about Darrin's murder the day his body was discovered. He said that his girlfriend tried contacting him through Facebook the night before he was murdered. He said he looked at his Facebook and he saw Darrin's message asking him if he knows where he can get any tools at the rate of $150. Detective Chase asked the boy about his Facebook page. He said he will give Detective Chase his password if he wants to access his Facebook. Detective Chase asked the boy that he heard that Darrin has been hitting licks lately. He said that was how Darrin got the shoes he sells. He said that was what he knew about him. Detective Chase told the boy to open his mouth so that he can get his swab. After collecting the swab, Detective Chase told him that he is going to jail that night because of all the warrants. He said he knew. Detective Chase left the room and took the swab to the medical lab. The second man's DNA was compared to the sample that was found on Darrin's ankle, but it didn't match. Finally, 13 months into the investigation, Tulsa PD brought someone in who claimed that they heard information about Darrin's murder. When he was brought to homicide, Detective Jason and Detective Calhoun went to the room where he was kept to interrogate the witness. When they entered, Detective Calhoun introduced himself and introduced Detective Jason. Detective Calhoun asked the witness that he heard that he said he had information about a homicide that happened a year ago. The witness said they heard a man admitting to picking Darrin up. He said Darrin and the man were in the back seat of the vehicle when the man shot Darrin. Detective Jason asked the witness what the suspect did with Darrin. The witness said they heard the suspect and his friends dump Darrin in an area that matches up with where Darrin was found. Detective Calhoun asked for the suspect's name. The witness gave Detective Calhoun the suspect's first name and Facebook profile. Detective Calhoun left the interrogation room to look up the suspect in the database. According to their records, the suspect was recently arrested with a small caliber gun. A detective said that could be the murder weapon. The suspect was released from custody, but his gun was still in police evidence. Detective Chase said he has to follow up with the crime lab for some testing on the firearm to see if they can get a ballistic match. He said if it matches, then, based on the story that they were given, it will be enough evidence to get an arrest warrant issued for the potential suspect. 2 months later, the gun did not match the murder weapon. Detective Calhoun will put out a bolo for the suspect with a warrant to collect his DNA. Then, nearly 2 years after Darrin's murder, Detective Calhoun was out working on another case when he got a call from patrol. The suspect finally turned up when the patrol pulled him for a traffic violation. Detective Chase headed to where the patrol team detained the suspect. When he got there, the suspect was sitting in the back seat of the patrol team's car. Detective Chase knocked on the mirror of the car and told the suspect to come down. Detective Chase showed the suspect a search warrant for his DNA. Detective Chase told the suspect to open his mouth, and he collected the swab he needed. After collecting the swab, Detective Chase asked the suspect if he was interested in going downtown to talk to him about a homicide. He said he wasn't interested. Detective Chase said he will probably be seeing him soon. He told him to take care of himself, and he entered his car and drove off. 2 days later, Detective Calhoun got a word from the lab. They told him that the suspect's DNA did not match the DNA that was found on Darrin's ankle. Detective Calhoun said he is disappointed. He said it doesn't mean that the suspect was not the killer, but he needs to reassess the case and look at what they got. Detective Calhoun worked the case for 2 more solid years without any leads. The case remained unsolved. Detective Calhoun said he wants the public to know the case is still an active investigation. He urged anyone that has information to call the tip line. Nearly 4 years after Darrin was killed, his family still hopes someone knows something that will help detectives solve the case.